Good afternoon and welcome to CGL's 1690 AM's Cinema Smackdown. My name is Michael Brody and I'm joined today by Shane Simmons and special guest Bern Larmouth, both of whom are here to help me make sense of the topic that we've been considering for quite a while. I'll get to that in a moment. How are you gentlemen doing today?
I don't know, I'm apprehensive about this topic. It's a Gordian knot of paradoxes and potential errors.
Okay.
Terrible continuity. We shall see.
I myself just hope that it goes better than the first time they recorded this, but I've come back specifically to fix it, and hopefully the body count will be less.
My initial idea today was to do a topic called time loops. However, in a little bit of research, I realized that every time you write time loops into the internet or ask people about it, they think you mean movies like Groundhog Day, which is not what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about infinite repetition of a time or a moment. What I actually want to talk about is more akin to a phrase. It wouldn't be called a time loop, it would be called a causal loop. So we're going to talk about movies today that are called causal loops, which is when, this is the definition of a causal loop, it's a theoretical proposition in which a sequence of events is among the causes of another event, which in turn is among the causes of the first mentioned event. This is a very frequent theme in many time travel stories, but it's basically when events throughout time come back around in some way. So this isn't just waking up in the morning and seeing the same guy on the staircase over and over again. This is having something that you are aiming towards, like a goal in your story, be part of stuff we've already seen and or realizing you are your own father, that kind of fun plot line.
I hate when that happens.
The thing that is interesting about a causal loop movie is that they are either locked causal loops where no matter what the characters do, they ultimately end up repeating the event that they're trying to avoid, or there are films in which they break the causal loop. Like, an example of breaking the causal loop would be Back to the Future. Because once Marty McFly returns to the present, he has altered everything. So the circle that creates one thing and brings it back around to another has been changed. But many other films, and I'll pick a very obvious one, the entire movie, 12 Monkeys, is about one perfect causal loop that just goes around and around. Am I mistaken? Is there a little thing at the end of...
No, it is a closed loop.
Yeah.
Although I'm starting to feel like I need a physics degree to participate in this episode.
Right, because you are clearly the dumbest member of our team.
Well, you pick me randomly off the street, so you get what you get.
As you probably know, the original Terminator movie is a pretty solid causal loop.
Hey, did they make any more of those?
Well, no. I mean, once you wrap something up so perfectly, the last thing you could ever do is justify a sequel by saying, hey, they sent more.
Yeah.
Hey, they sent more is the entire justification for future Terminator movies, which is awful. Awful.
Well, at least they realized with Terminator Genesis that this wasn't working and they were never going to do it again. So, they just decided, okay, well, we will call the franchise done. It was, those 28 films that we made and a TV series, and we'll just call it quits while we're ahead.
What are your thoughts on causal loops, Mr. Bern Larmouth?
Am I supposed to have thoughts? You told me I did not.
I was told there would be no math.
Exactly.
Just in general, like, I suppose we can just literally launch into it. We've already mentioned the Terminator franchise, although we could speak a little more about that, just a little. I don't really want to get into the... By the way, just as an anecdotal piece of information about today's show, we were inspired to talk about this because of Terminator being released, although...
And bombing tremendously.
Well, I guess. They always call movies that make hundreds of millions of dollars bombs.
It's well off making hundreds of millions of dollars in opening weekend.
I know.
It is not doing well.
The point being, that was sort of the justification for doing an episode about time loops, but I do have one specific film that came out last month that is much, much more of a causal loop movie that is worth talking about. We will get to that one. That's the real inspiration for today. We'll get to that film. But I procured advance critic screening tickets for the new Terminator film with the intention of bringing my two friends who are in the studio with me today, both of whom bailed both of whom
And you bailed too?
both of whom dodged the new Terminator movie bullet like Neo in Matrix.
Oh, well.
And yeah, it
I saw that particular salvo coming from years away.
yeah, you were not wrong.
Right from the very earliest of teaser trailers, I said, this looks like utter crap.
It is not the greatest of all of these films. By the way, the new Terminator film is in no way either a causal loop movie or even barely a time travel movie on any level. They really decided, what if we just do something totally different that no one sees coming or wants? Is kind of, I think, the idea behind the genesis of the new Terminator film. No pun intended.
Perhaps
Genesis.
Skynet can send a Terminator back in time to stop Tim Miller from making this film.
Oh, I'm sorry, Skynet? There's no Skynet in the new movie.
Oh, really?
What are you talking about?
Wow.
What are you talking about? Why would we need that? We ended that story. We're starting a new one. That's right, Laurie Strode. Your complete reboot series makes total sense, just like this one does. Well, why don't we get started on a couple of films that do actually fall into the causal loop. Shane, give us your. Do you have one or two in your mind that you want to get to, or do you?
Hey, I was told I did not have to
You
make a
don't
list
have to.
because you had a list.
I have a massive list. Do you want me to bring one up and you can comment on it?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch that I would mention on that list, but I'll say, okay, here's one of my favorite. It's the Spanish film Time Crimes.
Great.
There you go. That was my first.
We've all got that one as the right. That is a true causal loop movie. A character is home, living his life. When strange things begin to happen, he witnesses some very odd occurrences from people in the distance, and he slowly but surely has to go become those people.
Yeah.
It is a very
to help contrive these events to happen. And what's fascinating about the film is that as he goes through that, you realize, oh, there's going to be a second loop.
Yeah.
Because there's a number of dangling ends that is like, oh, he's going to travel again and cause these extra things to happen.
Yep. And I love that film, but I do remember when, I think we watched it together, I'd already seen it. There comes a point in the movie where he has to make his first decision to actually participate, and I think out loud you said, oh, there's no reason for all of this, no instigating moment. It's just already a loop.
He basically he witnesses himself doing some fairly odd things, and when the time comes to justify why is he doing these odd things, it's mostly because, well, I saw myself do this, so I guess I better do that.
Yep.
But one of the things about that film that to me still stands out when I think about it is the mood. It is so, you're not dragged through it, but you're enticed to every next scene. I feel like it really had a solid mood and just kept you moving along. And I mean, admittedly, with certain things that upon scrutiny might be a little pointless, I think it was very intelligent in the way that it was drawn out without being, you didn't have to overthink anything.
Well, the thing that is quite astonishing about Time Crimes in particular is that the mood that you were describing is that of an Italian giallo film. It is very much one of those movies with a causal loop added to it as the main thrust. It even has a masked killer doing his thing and being ominous and creepy, and it has a very giallo style to it, which I think is one of the greatest homages to that genre at all. It kind of gets away from it while praising it.
And yet, yeah, well, I would also say this film is particularly probably better than any giallo film I've ever seen. It's such a solid piece of work, as opposed to giallo stuff tends to be, well, that was a great scene, and then here's some ludicrous crap for 10 minutes, and then here's another good scene.
There are some masterpiece giallo films. I guess we're just going to have to do an episode about this in which
you
watch 20 great giallo films. That'll certainly happen any day now.
Yeah. Well, it took me long enough, but you did get me to watch Twitch of the Death Nerve, so.
Twitch of the Death Nerve, which is like the grandfather of every modern slasher, and an effective one in a lot of ways, although very funny in places. And also another huge giallo shout-out, I will never stop singing the praises of a movie called Blue Eyes of the Broken Doll, which is a near-perfect movie. And a lot of the Argento stuff is good or fun. Although, especially,
those are the ones I'm thinking of when I'm thinking. And here's this 10-minute
yes.
stretch of crap.
certainly his later films in that, his 80s movies in the giallo genre are, there's moments of absolute brilliance, and then, wow, are we waiting a long time for the next one of those. Dario Argento.
Yeah, so yeah, Time Crimes is tonally related, but so much thought went into the details of that to the point where there's that sort of infamous shot in the film where the main character, his arm is visible in one of the future time loops, but because we're focused on the other side of the screen, nobody ever sees it. Nobody ever notices, hey, there's someone else in the room, and there's an arm right there. And you have to go back and rewatch that scene and go, oh yeah, it was there.
An errant arm.
It wasn't a continuity error.
It is very true. Time Crimes is maybe one of the 10 best examples of a causal loop movie. The reason, I had mentioned this earlier, and we've all seen this, the reason I was inspired to talk about these types of movies was a recent Netflix release called In the Shadow of the Moon. By the way, I should probably have started off this show by issuing a massive spoiler warning, because just saying a movie is a causal loop movie is almost certainly telling you how it ends. And if you don't know...
Or in the case of In the Shadow of the Moon, it takes a while for it to reveal, by the way, this is going to involve time travel. I mean, if you're alert, you will figure it out pretty quickly.
Yes.
But they don't play that card for a while, so you might be fooled for a bit. But we just spoiled it.
At any rate, In the Shadow of the Moon is a recent Netflix movie. It is it's a Jim Mickelson film. It's very, very good, in my opinion. I have heard criticism of it, but most of the criticism is kind of humorous to me and outside the realm of, did you enjoy the 90 minutes of the film? It's actually a very tight, very well-made movie. It's kind of a great early 80s exploitation cop movie that stops being an early 80s exploitation cop movie.
And then becomes a dirtbag private eye movie.
Yep. And then, the whole time being kind of being a sci-fi film, hiding underneath.
Having really enjoyed it, and I did, when I look back, and I'm surprised actually just thinking about it right now, looking back on it, and maybe this has to do with this cultural shift that we have of Netflix movies. I feel like this felt a lot more like TV. And I've seen several of these not in the theater. I saw Time Crimes as well on a television screen, so I don't think it was that. But I do feel, and maybe it's because it has more of that 80s feel, like you were saying.
Like the 80s cop shows, the Magnum PIs and Hill Street Blues of the day. And you're not wrong.
Yeah, so,
You're not wrong.
And it kind of feels like that.
It does have some of that Hill Street Blues logic in it. All right, we'll be back after a message from a bunch of people I haven't vetted. So here we go.
I hadn't thought about that until you said the 80s thing.
Insightful.
But it really, I think back on it, and wow, it really does feel like TV more than a film. But I don't know if that really is just because now Netflix movies don't. It's a different experience seeing something of movie for the first time.
Plus, modern TV has become much more cinematic than it used to be, because you watch some of those old shows and they will not strike you as very movie-esque.
Yeah.
We have 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I have a few in here you're going to be like, oh, that's one of those movies? It's going to be interesting. There's titles you're going to be aware of the title, but certainly haven't seen the film or don't know about it. There's a few good ones.
Debbie Does Dallas is a causal loop.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's say certainly things are going in and out the same way over and over. And we are back on CGL at 1690 AM. Our little show is called Cinema Smackdown. And today we're talking about movies that have causal loops in them, which is to say films where an event is repeated either in a time travel method or some sort of looping mechanism that brings things back around. The example on Wikipedia is an interesting one. They say it's as if you're shooting pool, you hit a billiard ball, that ball goes all the way around the table and hits itself. Which is an interesting way of trying to imagine it, but it's not wrong per se. It's just, it gives you that sense of, well, I mean, I use it at the top of the show, the example being 12 Monkeys, where a character as a child witnesses someone be gunned down, grows up only to be the person who is being gunned down. It's a time travel back to that moment, and as an adult, turn out to be
Wow, that sounds like a great idea. We should stretch that out through an entire TV show.
or 30. Do you have a TV show example?
Well, I was thinking there's a 12 Monkeys TV show. That's why I'm saying that. But
with 4 seasons, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, by the way, I think that they actually get through the plot of the movie in the first hour. They have to do other things for the rest of the series. Yeah, it's not my favorite. I only watched 1 episode.
yeah, well, I mean, if we're mentioning 12 Monkeys as well, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention La Jetée, which is the original
go.
French film, 20-minute long short that basically does the same story in a series of still photos.
Absolutely. Well, we had brought up the movie that, as far as I'm concerned, inspired this, which is In the Shadow of the Moon, which I really liked. Pretty much everybody has Netflix these days, so everybody and anybody can go out there and watch this. It is a fun little film. It's certainly worth the time it takes to watch it. I got my parents to watch it, by the way. My parents are old people, so getting them to watch stuff can be interesting these days. My mother...
Does it have Tom Mix in it?
My mother is a science fiction fan, but she only kind of got the concept until I really fully explained to her the identity of the time traveler. And she was like, oh, right, that is that person. I see now.
Uh-huh, okay.
She had a good little moment there. And I was like, maybe you want to try some of this movie again. Just now that you know who it's supposed to be. At any rate, it's just a big... It's an endorsement of the film. I actually mostly hate all of the made-for-Netflix movies. A lot of them, though, are bought by Netflix.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of film festival, Sundance type pickup.
I believe this may be one of those films. I'm not looking at the internet right now. I don't know, but I think it may have been. Because it's a little better than your average...
It's a little better than Bright.
Yeah, it's a little better than Bright. So, I want to mention a few more of these types of movies. Of course, you can't mention Loop movies without eventually bringing up Looper in some degree.
Wonderful, promising film, right up until we discovered that Rian Johnson is the cinema equivalent of Hitler.
You swooped in and stole all my copy.
Well, you're going to call Rian Johnson Hitler as well?
No, I was just going to say, Rian Johnson created this cute little movie that we all fell mildly in love with and thought, this guy is definitely the right choice to make a big-budget science fiction movie. He's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
He would never just arbitrarily throw things out the window that we all were looking forward to every 5 minutes until the end of a film.
Yep, I was 100% on board with his choice as director of The Last Jedi, right up until I was, let's say, 10 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So wait, I want to understand, because when he said Looper and you launched right into this tirade, this isn't against Looper, right?
No, I enjoyed Looper.
Okay, good.
I enjoy it less now knowing that Rian Johnson is responsible for it.
I mean, Looper is a flawed but very entertaining film.
Yeah, it's a little messy, but it's still fun. And if only he had kept to independent original works, we'd all be fine now.
Rian Johnson, writer-director of Brick.
Yeah, exactly. Also another one, I quite like that as well.
Well, his next one is his, and it looks very intriguing. Mm-hmm. Knives Out, or
right.
I am a smart person who doesn't watch trailers, so I am not already ruined for seeing this movie, as I understand many people are. I have already.
So I'm not a smart person because I've seen a trailer.
I have already heard people who have seen the trailer say what the ending of the movie is, so I am staying clear of all of that kind of stuff.
This is one of those trailers that I stopped halfway through because I realized this looks good, and then I found out who was making it. But I was impressed with what I saw, and that's where I leave it.
I hear you.
So, I watched a trailer. I didn't pay full attention to it, so I did not discern the whodunit aspect of it, or whodunit in the whodunit. But there is a certain element of smug, self-satisfied that now, to my mind, reeks of Rian Johnson.
Right. Oh, so. You just dislike this man so
much. Yeah, well, I tend to dislike anyone who takes like the most celebrated IP in film history, priced at $4 billion, and turns it into unmarketable trash.
I I think you're over.
Name a Star Wars project that's made money since.
There's been exactly one.
No,
and it was
there's been two.
Film
Also
of
bombing.
this entire
Also
series.
bombing is the Galaxy Edge theme park element of Disney.
That's not a movie.
I know, but there's a.
Blaming
There,
Ryan Johnson for the.
I am.
part of that.
I'm also blaming him for the bankruptcy of Toys R Us.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right. I'm merely blaming him.
He had the Midas touch. He touched the Star Wars series and just turned it into a financial failure. It's astounding.
Here's the thing. I had nothing writing on the new trilogy of Star Wars. I don't like these movies. I am not a fan. They're fine. They're kind of not good, but fine. And J.J. Abrams didn't reinvent the wheel with his terrible.
No, he
terrible
certainly
movie
did not.
called The Force Awakens.
He made a very safe, mediocre
Yes.
film.
Exactly. And Ryan Johnson lost me in the first minute of his film when he has a character pretend he's on a broken telephone call. That is the moment where I was like, what are we watching? Why is there this terrible comedy scene in this?
Just like in the original, when Han Solo does that
He
in the control room.
He
No, it's the
sits there
same
for a whole
thing.
minute over and over saying, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. What was that? Oh, do we have a bad connection? No. Han Solo just goes, sorry, I didn't hear that, and he blasts the control panel in a tenth of a second. That's
See,
a bit that's
you're
fine.
falling into the trap that the superfans do, where they pick on every little, oh, I don't like that, I don't like that, and it's like, no, I'm talking overarching. You don't take Luke Skywalker, that people have been waiting 35 years to see in action again, and turn him into a grumpy old, fed up quitter.
They basically turned Luke Skywalker into a never was.
Yeah.
Not a used to be. He turns into a never was because once you hear what he's been up to since Return of the Jedi, you're like, that's it? You were hanging out in a cave.
It's kind of like he became a social studies professor at a community college.
Yep.
That was sort of his great heroic arc.
I realize we're off topic here, but I'm really curious about this Ryan Johnson thing. So let me get this straight. You blame Ryan Johnson for destroying this, and then what? The prequels were high art. Is that because if there's anything at all redeeming in this prequels? I want to hear if there's one
the greatest
scene.
The greatest achievement of Ryan Johnson's career is making everyone kind of go, well, in comparison, those prequels weren't so bad after all.
Which I have actually heard a few times.
Wow.
Look, the most valid thing anybody said about the new Star Wars movie came from Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill said, and I love that you can go find his quote somewhere, he said, well, here's what happened with me. I received the script, I read it, I phoned the director, and I said, Ryan, I fundamentally disagree with every single thing you have my character do in this film. But that said, I am a professional, and I will show up for work on Monday and make this movie with you. And I was like, yeah, good for you for saying out loud you don't agree with the choices that were made.
Yes.
Once again, I am calling upon Skynet to send a Terminator back in time to prevent Ryan Johnson from making that film.
Well,
Just get Deadpool to do it.
I don't know. He's a little messy with his time loop closures. I didn't even think about that. Of course, Deadpool 2 has many, many terrible time loops in it. Not a good version of this kind of story, to be fair. Let's get back to other films that have a causal loop of sorts. I'm going to bring up two movies that, for their own reasons, do not involve true time travel, and yet still have an element of, oh, we already saw this happen, and it's being repeated. There were two Roman Polanski movies. Can you guess the first one, Shane?
Oh, dear. I'm going to burn too much airtime just going,
That's fine. This is, again, we're going into massive spoilers here if you haven't seen this movie. Roman Polanski's The Tenant is a causal loop film.
You know, it's been so long since I've seen it, I don't remember that element.
All right, well, the movie opens with someone moving into an apartment building while another person is screaming and being taken out on a stretcher, and you quietly watch them become that person throughout the movie.
Ah, okay.
That is the entire premise of The Tenant. Spoiled! That is The Tenant, and it is a delightful march into madness that the main character goes through while quietly turning into the person he watched be dragged out of the building at the beginning. And there is another Roman Polanski film from 1972. He made a movie that is very little known because I've never heard anybody mention this publicly. I've seen this film. I kind of like it. It's called What? WHAT ? And it's a film about a young woman sort of traveling around having odd adventures. And in the middle of the movie, she spends a little bit of time at a villa and sees on a lower level of the villa somewhere outside, there's these levels, these patios, she sees a group of people having a laugh and enjoying a drink. And there's an oddness to the moment, and about 40 minutes later, she finds herself on that patio in that moment that she saw from above, and looks up and sees herself looking down at them, which is, in its own way, a strange little causal loop moment.
And there's nothing else that doesn't touch on the rest of the plot.
Yeah, just a moment of the story in which she experiences this what I would call a time loop, but is a causal loop, where she is part of something she has already seen happen. It's just an interesting thing. It's almost like saying these two areas of the villa are in different time zones. And so you can actually see yourself in another period doing something. It's a very, very strange little art film, What? And it opens with the most horrifying hitchhiking scene you will ever see in the first 5 minutes.
Okay.
It is an absolute
So she picks up
warning.
Rutger Hauer.
The Rutger Hauer, if he decided to bugger you, yes.
Oh, dear.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And by the way, this movie is a comedy.
Of course it is.
So
Of
no.
course it is. Welcome to the 70s.
I have another causal loop movie to talk about. There is a film, I think it's from 2009, it's called Triangle. Have either of you gentlemen ever heard of it?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
It's from director Christopher Smith, who did Severance as well as Creep.
Oh, yes.
You familiar with this one?
Severance, yes.
He did a Black Death movie with, I hate when I forget names. The guy the king on Game of Thrones in the first season.
Oh, okay,
You know,
right.
the dude who always dies.
Sean Bean.
Sean Bean!
Well, he wasn't a king, but okay.
He was a king.
No. He was the hand of the king.
Oh, was
Oh,
it?
Lord, I'm studying.
Well,
Game of
let's
Thrones.
get into Game of Thrones because I'm a super huge fan and I'm sure I'm right. Sorry. Sean Bean in a Black Death movie. And anyway, Christopher Smith made a movie called Triangle, which stars an actress named Melissa George, who is an interesting, compelling actress. I actually don't feel like we see enough of her. And that is a very simple movie about a woman who washes up, not on shore, but she washes up to a ship, a big, I don't know, like a fishing ship, but a large, multi-leveled ship of sorts. And she climbs on board, finds no one there, and eventually discovers a masked killer who is racing around the ship at the same time as her. And it doesn't take you very long to realize there's something oddly familiar about all the actions you're seeing, and the entire movie works as a giant circle, getting her back around to all of the events she has seen play out, that she has to replay them, which is why the film is called Triangle. I suppose there may even be a third version of her somewhere on the boat, but I don't remember.
Oh, I thought it would have been a Bermuda Triangle thing. No.
It could be. It's been a while. I mean, I saw it in 2009. I just remember it having interesting mood, and of course, there's that recognition about 10 minutes into the movie of going, is this a circle? Are we coming back around to similar events?
I feel like I should speak on behalf of the audience, who I'm sure many are shouting, you know, Game of Thrones has causal loop stuff too.
Yeah, with Bran, right?
Yeah. The hold the door stuff. And
as you probably know, everyone loves how that turned out at the end. So,
well,
successful causal loop story.
Back when the causal loop stuff happened, the show was still firing on all cylinders. People loved that material.
Mm-hmm. I was not totally burnt out by that point, but I wasn't in love with that plot point. It was kind of lame as far as I was concerned. Well, how many seasons in was it that they paid off that character's name? How many seasons?
What is it, 5 or 6?
Wow.
5 or 6. That was not surprising to me when it came around. It wasn't a moment of revelation. It was, yeah. It was more of a, yeah, of course that's what he's saying. But anyway.
What, you were in a weeping mess like everyone else?
I really wasn't.
Well, many people were.
I was moved. I won't say I was never moved by Game of Thrones. I was once or twice, but that was everything involving Bran was a negative for me, including the ending of the series. At any rate, here's a movie that has a causal loop that doesn't really usually get put into this category. The third Harry Potter movie,
Right.
The Prisoner of Azkaban has. You don't recall?
I'm highly critical of that one, though. So
There is
that's the one everyone loves,
Oh, right,
and
that one.
Yeah, I know, but that was when it was, okay, we got rid of Chris Columbus as director. Now we brought in a real director with some real style to him. And they do that causal loop thing towards the end, and I thought it was just supremely unclever.
It's not clever, but I still do think that is the only watchable film in the series. The only one. Every other movie relies almost entirely on you having literally just finished reading the book in order to understand what is being shown to you on the screen. There are a few films that have exactly that problem. They do not go out of their way to explain things that are fully explained in the novel. But before I go back to my Harry Potter rant, I will remind the listener that you were listening to CJLO 1690 AM. Our little show is called Cinema Smackdown. I'm Michael Brody. I'm talking to Shane Simmons and Bern Larmuth. We're talking about causal loop films.
And how J.K. Rowling utterly failed to do a clever one.
I mean, I would argue that she failed to do anything clever in all of her books, but that's because I'm not a fan. I don't think it's any better or any worse than the tone she was getting at in most of her writing, which is very smooth, and it is, it's, let me see if I remember the sequence properly. Harry and his friends are in trouble, they look across, I want to say a lake?
Something like that, yeah.
Someone on the other side casts a spell that helps them out, and Harry's pretty sure it's his dad. But a little while later in the story, he winds up on that side of the lake, and he realizes he, in fact, is the person who cast that spell and helped them out. It's straightforward.
Yeah.
It's just that.
To the point where if you're going to do that sort of time loop thing, that is the most mundane one you can possibly do.
Agreed. Hey, it's an example. Bern, you're a big fan of the movie Primer.
Yes, I am.
How much of because my recollection of that film is...
Please explain the third act.
No, boy.
How much of that film is a
that
causal loop? Because they do keep going back and creating the thing that allows them to do everything, right? That's part of the movie, is essentially they fulfill the causal loop. That's my recollection.
Yes, but wow, even I, who have gotten into huge discussions about it, feel that this is one of those films that I really have to have watched recently to really be able to expound on it properly. It is a bit of a mind... I can't say that on air.
Yeah,
mess, but...
A mind mess. A mind messer.
I've seen it a couple times, and I've shown it to people, but it's still... It's a film with some big and clever ideas that is dragged down by the fact that the guys who made it were novice screenwriters.
Yeah, it's an agonizingly amateurish film, but is something in it works?
It's a great little low budget science fiction film. Mm-hmm. But
I wouldn't say great. I'm not one of those.
No. But all the elements are there. It's just that because they were pretty much first timers and everything, you just needed a more experienced hand on the writing front to communicate a lot of the bigger ideas to an audience. Because I'm sure in their head it makes sense, but it still leaves people muddled. And by the third act, you're kind of going, I'm not quite getting all the elements of this.
Personally, I think that the main thing it needs is subtitles.
Well, I mean, the audio is one of the worst things about the film. There is one scene which is completely washed out, which you cannot hear anything. They're near a fountain. Have you watched
that scene with subtitles?
If you recall, may have, but I don't recall. And there are scenes which you cannot hear dialogue at all. So yes, the audio is very bad. One of the things beyond the fact that I think there's a lot of clever ideas in it is that not once does the film speak down to the audience, not once does it kowtow to having to explain anything, to a fault, I agree, to a fault, but the film opens with the main characters speaking already in the middle about doing something, about a concept, and you have to figure out from what their somewhat technical jargon is, what they're actually speaking about. And I find that was really well done. Mm-hmm. And I would say that some of the writing really works. I think overall the scripting needed help, but I think that a lot of the layout or the way that the individual scenes were done really worked very well for that.
Well, it is a very, very well-liked and well-reviewed movie, and I understand why. There is an underlying charm that the film has. And we were all looking forward to that director going on to make bigger and better works, or more concisely clear pieces of art. And his follow-up works are gorgeous and incomprehensible. He's made a few films, one as director. What's that? Upstream Color?
Upstream Color.
I have no idea what that film is about, other than people will eventually become fish. I think is the whole point of that
But
movie.
we come
Or is
from
it
pigs. It's pigs.
Pigs, fish,
Yeah.
right.
Oh.
But he's also been an actor in a few people's projects, but he always seems to, for some reason, gravitate towards equally obtuse storytelling.
Actually, he was a consultant on Looper.
That's correct. I forgot all about that. That's right. Yeah.
So Rian Johnson took him and said, you really had some great ideas. I want you to help me figure out this time travel thing. And
he told him, Joseph Gordon-Levitt really needs a fake nose in this.
The biggest point, my biggest point of contention, where my suspension of disbelief really lagged in Looper, is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's transformation into Bruce Willis. That honestly was my biggest problem with it, because it just didn't work.
I have to say, it does put me in the mind of Andy Serkis's transformation into Gollum in Return of the King. It has that, wow, you're deteriorating fast. That ring must be really evil.
Oh boy. Alright, let's move on to another film I think is worth mentioning that has a nice, interesting causal loop that I'm positive neither of you has seen, even though I've been urging both of you to watch it for 4 years. There is a little movie called Time Lapse, which is... You're giving me a look like maybe you watched it?
I'm trying to... It's ringing a bell.
It's a film about 3 people who live in an apartment who realize that across the way in another apartment is a machine that is taking a photo of their front window every 24 hours. And they go into that apartment and find a stack of photos, and the photos are 24 hours ahead of reality. So if this morning at 8 a.m. it takes a picture, it's of tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And the thing they see is one of them holding up a newspaper with a piece of information for the next day, because now they're they're now aware that this is happening. And as the film progresses, they see very strange photos coming from the next day, and sometimes they restage them, just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
They restage some odd thing, and sometimes they're distressing, and they realize something is going to happen. And the movie moves forward on that concept, and it has wrinkles that are very interesting. It's a tiny little movie taking place in an apartment complex called Time Lapse, and it stars Danielle Panabaker from The Flash. Excellent movie. Really worth the 90 minutes it takes to watch it.
I am intrigued enough to give that a look, yeah.
Yeah.
It really begs the question, what would it take to get you to move out of an apartment? Because a lot of films in it like this, where you're not necessarily only time-lapse films, but just like, well, wait a second, at this point, I'd be gone, deposit damned. So, anyhow.
Well,
Do they start flashing each other winning lottery numbers?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of strange behavior, but they really explore the concept.
And then Biff Tannen sees them up to it, and he decides to interfere, and he just screws up everything.
Damn you, Biff.
Another movie I really, really like that has a causal loop style of storytelling is the Adrian Brody movie, The Jacket.
Yes. Yeah. Good mood to that one, too.
You recall that one, eh?
Yeah.
It was the first time, because I was not a fan, it was the first time I ever saw Keira Knightley in something and wasn't angry. I'm not a huge Keira Knightley fan, what can I tell you? But she's charming in that movie, playing a very damaged person. And through a very, very strange version of time travel, we see events that explain her persona piece by piece. I don't know, would you even call it, have you seen The Jacket?
I've seen it, but I can't say I remember it much.
It's about a guy who's put into a straitjacket and dropped in a drawer for some kind of therapy, and every time he goes in, he comes out in a different period, a different time. All throughout, I think, his own lifetime, or perhaps it's her lifetime. It's a bit of an art film. The movie was much maligned. It was crapped on by critics. The real problem with the film is it was made by an artist, not a filmmaker. He was, well, don't get me wrong, the man clearly is a filmmaker, but his primary goal in life was to create, I think, paintings and certain kinds of art. and he was lured into doing this with many, many promises, all of which were reneged upon while he was making the film. I think they took it away from him. He basically vowed at the end of that production to never go near another movie. So it's one of those films where I look at the finished product and say, this is pretty great. Please go make another movie. There's another example of that.
I'm not sure that actually that the plot falls into a causal loop, though.
Mm-hmm. He's going throughout periods of her life reappearing. He's always the same age, and she keeps changing. I don't know, it's sort of loop-ish, because whatever age he runs into her at, he's not changing the direction that the time travel plot is. He keeps affecting her, but towards... that's my recollection.
Yeah, I don't recall enough, actually.
Perhaps he does alter her potential future, now that I think about it. So there we go. It's not really a spoiler for the jacket, because I don't remember how it goes. I do remember I quite like it. It has, as you said, great mood. It is a film with a good tone to it.
And it does not actually feel like a lot of these films. It doesn't feel like a time travel movie. Mm-hmm. It has quite a different mood, sometimes sinister. It actually moves about in its mood, but doesn't. You don't feel like, oh, I'm watching a time travel movie now. There's something different to it. So,
but I will say it was absolutely not well liked when it came out. So it was a film that I was surprised at how much I enjoyed, and wound up having to recommend to people, because everybody had been essentially warned, don't see it. Doesn't work. Doesn't make sense. It's like, actually, it's pretty straightforward. It works fine. Another example I quite like, I don't think either of you have ever seen this, because it was the first cartoon movie sequel to a TV show. It's the first Futurama cartoon, because the show got canceled. They brought it back as a series of 4 films. The first movie is called Bender's Big Score, Futurama Bender's Big Score. And it's a 90-minute film, and it is entirely, once you get into the meat of that story, because Futurama always touched on little science fiction ideas, having fun with it, doing a lot of comedy. Once you get into the meat of this particular episode, it is a causal loop story where one of the characters is present throughout the story of the film in his usual incarnation as a wisecracking young man. But we are introduced to another character early on who just shows up, who's an old guy, who's kind of hip, kind of this, kind of that. And it turns out to be the same character, having lived his entire life, coming back around to revisit his friends at a much later period, complete with physical transformations that are all built into the story once we learn his eventual fate. And it's not a happy fate. When you watch this as a cute little upbeat cartoon show from the creator of The Simpsons, it gets a little bit dark, especially in this causal loop plot point, which I was really fond of. This also does question the whole concept of, will we break the loop? Or will I actually end up back here doing the same thing? Quite well done, in fact. For me, it's the high point of the entire Futurama oeuvre, let's say. Because some of it is disposable, some of it is compelling, but the Bender's Big Score is the highlight. It could have been their theatrical movie, as far as I was concerned. That's how much I like the story of that movie.
Can I ask you a question? Is that how it's pronounced? Oeuvre?
Oeuvre.
Because at the moment you have a French word, I can never get my head around how to say it in English, because I hear it in French.
I know.
And I'm not picking up it.
And you're dead right, I'm not saying it in the French style, I'm saying it in the...
So that's how English people say it.
I've heard it said that way.
All right.
Or perhaps I haven't. Shane?
I don't know, but it makes me want to call an Uber. Yeah.
Other causal loop movie is one we would get to right after we do these messages, because we're right at that point in the show. Just about to go to the title, and I'm like, I'm already 45 seconds over.
That Futurama thing reminded me of the very early plotline in Red Dwarf, where
Yeah, they have multiple causal loops.
Yeah, has an interaction with himself at 100 and whatever. But also has that great moment, prepare yourself for a shock, Lister, but I just saw you die. It's like, what do you mean prepare for... You didn't even pause!
My favorite about that, and we should have been doing this on the air, is the fact that when they ultimately reveal that it isn't Lister, it's his son.
That he's died,
and he goes,
and he's so relieved.
At least he lived a life.
Yeah.
That's his reaction.
Yeah.
Well, at least he lived a life. It's like, it's not me, we're all good. Jesus. 10 seconds.
Are we going to, is on the list, is the butterfly effect on that list?
No. That movie's fucking irritating.
Yeah, but okay.
You can totally do that.
It's not
No.
awful.
It's the alternate ending that I would have
I
mentioned,
don't
but
remember it.
don't worry about it.
And we're back on CJLO 1690 AM. You're listening to Cinema Smackdown. I'm joined today by Shane Simmons, Bern Larmouth. We're talking about causal loop films, which I've explained 3 times now. Still perhaps not to anyone's satisfaction. One of the movies that we can all weigh in on, it didn't really occur to me until late in the game of writing a list of these films, a true causal loop trilogy is the movie Evil Dead 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Evil Dead has a moment in which Ash, looking through the Necronomicon, sees a picture of the Savior who came from the sky.
The Blue Knight.
And do either of you recall what Ash said upon hearing he was the one who banished the evil?
Yeah, he didn't do a very good job, did he?
Which, when I saw that movie in the cinema in 1987, the moment he said, "He didn't do a very good job, did he?" I said, "That's you."
Yeah.
There's no way that's not you. I had no idea that they were actually going to go full-on time travel at the end of Evil Dead 2, but it's a wonderful moment. He also says unmistakable, feels like someone just walked over my grave. Yeah, I feel like you're giving us hints that this may come back around in some capacity. Shane, did you have something you wanted to bring up about the world of causal loops or time loops?
Oh, okay. Well, I threatened to do it in a commercial break, and I'm going to do it now. I'm going to mention the butterfly effect, which is one of those popular time travel movies when it came out, about a lot of screwing up the timeline and trying to fix things and making things better, but it's not quite perfect. I think I'm going to go back one more time, and then they screw it up even more. Until, eventually the end of the film is about him severing ties with a character so that none of this will happen.
Right.
However, on the DVD, there's an alternate ending to the film. And I thought the whole breaking a lifelong friendship in childhood ending was grim enough. I mean, that was fine. I like that. There's an even grimmer alternate ending, though, where he decides to project himself so far back in time he is still in the womb, and he strangles himself with his own umbilical cord. And that's the solution to preventing all this mess from happening. It's like, that's a little extreme. I much prefer the harshness of him. Oh yeah, here's the love of my life, and I'm just going to say something cruel to her as a child, and we will never be friends.
It certainly brings up the whole, would you kill baby Hitler, or would you have a conversation with Hitler to convince him to strangle himself as a baby?
Would you talk fetus Hitler into committing suicide?
Exactly. That's kind of an awesome thought.
Now, because you mentioned that the alternate ending or different take, here's another movie that I believe is a very good example of one that had, which I didn't care for, I think, until I saw the alternate, which is Donnie Darko.
There you go.
Now, that alternate take, I think, actually, I was not a fan until I saw the alternate. Maybe, I don't recall even the differences very well, but that eventually I did come to like that movie, which was
my recollection of the 2 cuts of Donnie Darko is the part you're talking about is the same. The additions to the Donnie Darko director's cut include extra explanations in the middle of the movie about time travel and alternate music choices, all of which I disagreed with. Every one of those music choices, including one which completely killed one scene for me by moving the exact song that was perfect in the moment to a different sequence earlier, made no sense. But the way that the story of Donnie Darko resolves is identical. I believe that you had a very similar experience to what I had, which was getting to the last 25 minutes of the movie and starting to get annoyed with it on a first viewing.
Yes.
And then in a future revisiting, kind of just enjoying the ride.
That's probably what it was.
Yeah, see, my experience with Donnie Darko is watching it when it first came out and having that sort of David Lynch feel about it. with there's a lot of ambiguity in this. Mm-hmm. I wonder how much of it is really intentional, or if the director fully understands what he's trying to say. Because I had that same sort of impression the first time I watched Eraserhead, where it's like, is this guy just arbitrarily pulling weirdness out of his ass, or does he really mean all of this? And I think in David Lynch's case, yes, he has it in his head, this is what it all means. So then with Donnie Darko, I made probably the mistake of listening to the commentary track with the writer-director Richard Kelly talking about his film, and it was one of those director commentary tracks where I realized, oh yeah, you really don't have much of a clue, do you? A lot of this ambiguity is just arbitrary, and you don't seem to have a firm grasp of what you're going. It's like, I'll throw this in, and people will think it's cool, and they will read what they want into it, which is a writer trick I despise. Sofia Coppola.
I am actually a much bigger fan of Richard Kelly than I am of Sofia Coppola, no shock. But I've enjoyed all of Kelly's films. He's done, I believe, 3, because he did Donnie Darko, then he did Southland Tales, which is a massive mess. But inside that mess is about a whole good movie, sort of drawn out in weirdness and places. I liked it as a messy art film. I like the ending, a lot of the strange character moments. It certainly has some violence I'm not thrilled with. It's just odd.
I think the good movie aspect, I think I got up to get a beer at that point, because I missed that. And I missed that in that movie.
And for anyone who might be a fan, it has a score by Moby, which I actually think is fantastic. It's subtle. It's a subtle score, but it's very, very pleasant. It works really well outside the film. I've listened to it.
He also worked on the screenplay for the Tony Scott film Domino, which was abysmal.
Yeah, but there's nothing left of whatever the writer intended.
Yeah.
It's an entirely edited together mess. Like
it was that downslide period of.
Right.
I'm sorry, Shane, but
yeah.
The editing was the absolute worst thing about that movie. There's editing every 7 seconds. I mean, it's crazy.
You're
3.5 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Faster.
It's almost a strobe effect.
Cam, and it's almost a strobe.
No, there was a very specific moment in Tony Scott's career where his style just broke.
Yeah.
And he decided, I'm going to do this wacky version of myself to the point where it was incomprehensible gibberish.
Through the film Spy Game.
I would say, yeah, Spy Game is definitely, Spy Game is that switchover moment, but I still like Spy Game. It has it has a comprehensive, okay, this is the tone and color and look of this segment in this time period, and he chose one for each time period, and it made sense as a comprehensive whole. Mm-hmm. Whereas after that, he ran absolutely roughshod with that style, and
he made about 4 movies in a row that are almost
unwatchable. They're obliterated his own career as far as I'm concerned.
So I don't blame Richard Kelly for that. He also did the bizarre long-form adaptation of a Twilight Zone episode about the people who get the box. Is the box? Is that what it's
called? Yeah. I know which one you're talking about.
In a very interesting movie. I wouldn't call it a success exactly. But
I kind of hated it because I really, it was that concept which I like.
Right.
That episode which I also liked back in the day, and it had Frank Langella as the guy with the box, and I love Frank Langella, right. So it had all that for it, and it's like, this is a rubbish version of the story.
It's not just, well, look, here's what I would say. They do an excellent adaptation of the story for 35 minutes, and then they
have to stretch
going for an hour and a half more, and that continuing hour and a half is fascinating to me. I'm not saying it's wonderful and the best way to tell this story. It is absolutely not, but it's an interesting.
It's like,
let's just keep going.
This was always a 22-minute television story, and to try and stretch it beyond that is really digging.
But if you've
deep.
enjoyed Donnie Darko, that hour and a half added to the pretty great Twilight Zone episode is pure weird Richard Kelly stuff. It just keeps going and going and going. I actually thought it was engaging in its own way. I cannot argue with you about the whole, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But I'm sort of glad it exists as an oddity. That movie came out around 2009. Richard Kelly has not worked since that day. He has something like 10 screenplays in development that just keep not quite getting greenlit. So he
Yeah,
managed to get another project.
that's so many careers, unfortunately.
I would like him to keep working.
Look, I would happy to see more work from him, but
So you didn't actually voice. What did you think of Donnie Darko?
I thought it was ultimately pretentious and empty.
Right. I started off feeling that way, and on a revisit of the film, now I find it very charming.
Yeah, you had you've seen it once?
I've just seen it the one time. Well, I would say 1.5 because I sat through the entire movie again, but with the commentary track.
Yeah, I don't count
that. Doesn't count.
That's not an experience for you of just watching a film.
No, it's not. It's not. I don't count it as a proper viewing. But I'm just saying,
I might actually not hate that film if you watch it again. It's been 20 years.
Possibly,
17
but
years.
I was able to.
But I hear that Donnie Darko sequel is wonderful and everyone loves it.
S. Darko. Yeah, everyone does. We're almost out of time. Not by Richard Kelly. In the grand tradition of straight to VOD movies like Roadhouse 2, 8mm 2. There's 40 more of these where you say they somehow made a sequel to this. Well, no, they didn't. But they put the title on another project and said they did.
The only one of those which is good, of course, is Open Water 2.
Yep, but that's a real movie.
Yeah.
What is the name of that Spike Lee Clive Owen movie that you like?
Inside Man.
Inside Man. They recently released Inside Man 2. Straight to VOD.
Still stuck in a wall, pooping in a bucket.
Same level of quality as S. Darko, just so you know. I will just quickly mention a couple titles just to get us out, because we're almost done. There is, of course, a tiny causal loop plot point in Interstellar.
Yes.
It's me, the bookcase man! Which I saw coming from the first minute of that movie and did not enjoy. But as soon as they showed that moment, I was saying, "Oh, great! It's one of these causal loops."
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. That film reeked of pretension for me, so that one
yes.
I couldn't
forget Donnie Darko. Interstellar.
And that's the one I love.
It's unwatchable.
Really?
I do.
I think it's dull as
There you go.
Just dull. It's a very dull film. It has the surprise appearance of Matt Damon in the middle of the movie, and I was already so checked out by that point. It was just like,
I will readily admit it scratches a particular itch in me that does not exist in other people.
I wish we had another 13 or 14 minutes for you to actually tell me about this, because now I'm intrigued. Yeah. We're going to have to do it off air because we are 30 seconds away from being done.
No! Unless we fire up the time machine and go back to the beginning of the show.
No, not again. No. We got through it. There's no blood this time. I'm quite happy with how this one went by.
Well, on that note, you have been listening to Cinema Smackdown for Sunday, November the 3rd. My name is Michael Brody. I've been joined today by Shane Simmons and Bernal Armouth, and this is the last time we're doing this episode.
Yeah, I'm off to strangle your fetus right now.
You monster. even going anywhere near that kind of joke. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back next week, hopefully with a completely different episode, not related to this one.
Excellent. That's a good way to go out.
4 seconds off.
Strangling fetuses is always the best way to end anything, I think.
It's a solution to everything.
Well done. All the comments you made right at the end about what the causal loop problem was. There's no blood this time.
Well, I think the fact that I actually just came up with that at the beginning and then brought it back at the end too. That was fun.
I know. I really
but that's totally because he mentioned the time machine, so it worked out.
But yeah, on air, I'd love to hear why Interstellar isn't a piece of massive pretentious garbage. But in person, I don't care. Well, this is a shockingly successful day in that we recorded something that is probably usable. And
I was not super thrilled with it. I might be.
You can come back and re-record.
I might be willing to do that. I get very like.
No, I agree with you.
I was very happy that he did that. But the two versions there, they've got these little squeak things that I didn't.